The debate over gun control has been inescapable since well before December 14th, 2012, a fateful day for the residents of Newtown, Connecticut, when Adam Lanza, after murdering his mother, proceeded to Sandy Hook Elementary School and left dead in his wake 20 elementary school students between the ages of 6 and 7 years old and 6 staff members. You should listen to me because gun violence and mass shootings are the leading cause of death in the United States, and I can tell you how this is happening and what can be done to stop this. Through this speech, I will argue that the federal government should institute and enforce universal background checks on all prospective gun buyers. First, I will argue that the current state of gun control is directly responsible for gun violence in America today. Second, I will argue that universal background checks can halt mass shooters from obtaining firearms and stop these attacks before they can happen. And third, I will argue that universal background checks do not infringe on the U.S. Constitution and are in alignment with the Second Amendment. So let's begin by discussing how the current state of gun control is directly responsible for gun violence in America today. A lack of adequate firearm control has allowed mass shootings across the nation and successful assassinations on politicians and public figures in the last 50 years. According to Ethan McLeod, associate editor for CQ Researcher, the first 6 months of 2017 witnessed over 100 mass shootings, where a minimum of 3 persons were murdered by a singular shooter in one time and place, and over 300 of these following said minimum for the year. Sounds like it's not that many people, yet this accounts for over 900 American lives in a matter of 10 to 11 months of this year. This is the current state of gun control allowing these kinds of attacks to take place. Firearms and adequate gun control was not a central issue until mid-January 2013, when President Barack Obama called on Congress to ban the sale of assault weapons, mandate universal background checks, as well as other sweeping and stifling actions against gun transactions. Moving towards a solution, we can discuss how the most allowed means and most admittedly used means of firearms purchased by convicted felons, known as the private seller loophole, can be closed and we can have restorative and justice brought back to the U.S. The private seller loophole is the most admittedly used means of firearms being purchased by convicted felons and prohibited persons not allowed by the federal government to have or possess firearms as they are considered a danger to themselves and others. According to Representative Rhonda Fields, the current state of gun control and a lack of universal background checks are just allowing criminals to skirt around current state and federal legislation and contribute to the murder of 34 American citizens every single day. If the private seller loophole is closed, if private sellers are not only given the means, but required per federal mandate to conduct background checks on their buyers, the private seller loophole can be closed and more peace of mind can be brought to American citizens. As previously stated, the private seller loophole is the most admittedly used means of firearms and accounts for 80% of all handguns taken from criminals after committed crimes with said weapons. 80% of those weapons were sold by private dealers, and 86% of all current private sellers have sold a minimum of 1 firearm to a prohibited person. Most of these act unconsciously and are unaware of this fact. However, many, I would say almost half of these, do so for the sake of money making and for profiteering. Known as bad apple dealers, these private sellers operating legally and legitimately through the current gun legislation boundaries account for 3,000 sellers nationally. Moving to a solution, we can discuss how universal background checks can stop this and how through federal legislation, private seller loophole can be closed through said federal mandate. Universal background checks, if enforced, can save tens of thousands of lives annually. Per given statistics, mass shootings are the most feared and most unfortunately frequent means of mass death in the U.S. and in many other countries. However, for the sake of argument, the federal government must institute this to bring peace of mind so that a lack of gun control and mass shootings that have happened across our nation for the last 50 years can become no more than a dark chapter of our history, but not to be of our present and never again to be of our future. the private seller loophole is closed. Citizens can have a peace of mind. People walking down the street every day fear for their lives. This should not be in a free country. Now, to move towards what pro-gun activists may say to be unconstitutionalism in universal background checks, I would say to them, it's untruth. Wayne LaPierre, Executive Vice President for the National Rifle Association, established in its original intent to educate the American people on the potential and danger of firearms, yet how they can be used for good, as mentioned and quoted in the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, the right to keep and bear arms for the sake of a free state, not for the sake of personal use, and never intended for the sake of individuals to carry out malicious attacks on each other. That is not a free state. And Wayne LaPierre's statement goes, let's be honest, criminals will never submit to universal background checks, so they never will be universal. But this is a gross misunderstanding and one of the most common misconceptions about the current state of gun control, and more importantly, the potential for universal background checks. Despite Wayne LaPierre being the leader of the largest pro-gun activist group in the United States and one of the largest in all of the world by population, 74% of all current National Rifle Association members stand beside universal background checks, and 87% of all current gun owners, through a survey taken, find that they stand beside universal background checks as well. So unfortunately, Wayne LaPierre and some of the higher-ups of the NRA stand alone in their statements. Citizens want peace of mind. Citizens need this. We all do. So, in conclusion, we discussed how the current state of gun control is directly responsible for gun violence in America today, leading to thousands of American lives almost every year being lost to unnecessary, insensitive, and completely negligent violence. Second, discussed how universal background checks can halt mass shooters attempting to purchase firearms being run through a federal background check and not even allow the possibility of obtaining firearms, so the potential for an attack becomes no more. And third, we discussed how, despite confident statements of pro-rights activists, universal background checks are constitutional, and that those persons attempting to pass through them, legitimate legal buyers, would merely do so, pass through in a matter of minutes. A small price for safety. I hope that through this speech, you can stand beside me and hundreds of thousands, even millions of American citizens and current gun owners in saying universal background checks can help us and not hurt us, and innocent children like Noah Posner and Catherine Hubbard do not need to fall victim to such innocent and unnecessary violence as took place in Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012. Thank you.